Good morning. I'm Matt. I'm here again with Tom Greenwell, our CEO and the owner of Greenwell Farms. And how are you doing today, Tom?
Very good.
Nice. Today we're going to be talking about a very complex, very ever-morphing topic called coffee grading. And this is going to be a big one, yeah? So, what is coffee grading?
Well, there's a grading standard for Kona coffee or Hawaiian coffee, and it's got to do with size of the beans, amount of defects. We have 5 different grades of coffee, and so extra fancy is 19/64 of an inch wide, not long, not thickness of the bean. And remember, this is always green coffee, not roasted.
All green coffee.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
now, do coffee grading systems are they uniform around the world, or does every region have their own standards?
really, every region has their own standards.
I see.
The standards in Hawaii were developed back in the 60s.
The 1960s. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the goal of it?
Was to help the farmers keep the quality high.
I see. So when he talks about the 1964, so imagine we have this big boxy classifier with sloped metal screens, and they have round openings, and their screens are layered. So when you say 1964, so that's the diameter of the opening on the top screen.
That's the size of the hole.
Right. So anything that can't pass through that opening is your largest bean, and that's going to be your extra fancy. And then it gets smaller as it goes down, right?
And then
What's
every 64th of an inch.
Right, every 64. So what's the difference in the taste of, you said we have 5 grades, so if you're drinking an extra fancy here or a prime here, that's our lowest grade, would they taste different?
If they were absolutely identical in the grade as far as defect-wise, not much.
Not much, I see.
But when an object is bigger, it's a lot easier to grade. So the extra fancy is a bigger bean. It's easier to work. It's easier to get different defects out. A lot of defects, caused by environmental, mechanical, or just handling.
Right. So when he says defects, my understanding is we have primary defects that are really not good in coffee at all, and then secondary defects are kind of minor. Instead of a hemisphere, it's convex or concave, or it has a small chip or something like that, right? Funny shape. So what's the percentage of defect in your top grade?
Percentage. Okay, we are allowed up to 8 defects. Okay, that's 8. That's normally a defect is quantified by 5 beans equals 1 defect. But in your primary defects, you're talking about sour, black, mold, things that change the flavor of coffee drastically.
Right.
And that is 1 bean is 1 defect. So if you think about it, in our extra fancy, if you just make the minimum, you would have 8 defects.
8 defects per 300 grams.
Per 300 grams, which is actually equal to 1,500 beans.
Okay, I see. So that's
And
a
8
very,
beans
very small percentage.
And 8 beans out of that would be less than
About 0.5% or less.
Yeah.
Now, if in prime, how much defect?
You're allowed up to 15%.
15. I see.
So that's 15 pounds out of 100 pounds.
Right. So I was surprised to learn that the certification of this grade, when you call the state inspectors in to actually, say this is this grade, it's voluntary now?
Yeah, it's not mandatory anymore. The industry asked to remove mandatory during the economy crash. We had no inspectors. Our coffee was sitting in the mill, and it was only supposed to be for a couple years until we could get everything rolling again.
Right.
But a lot of the industry decided that we didn't need grading. So
I see.
But we grade. We do we use the the Hawaii Department of Ag grading certificate on every single bean that they sell or roast.
That costs you money, right?
Oh yeah.
So why do you continue to maintain that standard when other people are like, yeah, I don't, it's not voluntary, I won't do it?
Well, that keeps us on our toes. Yeah. It keeps our quality higher than most, I would say. And we'll do 1 million pounds of cherry, right? And every bean gets certified.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. Now, in the future, do you think that mandatory grading will or should come back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, we're asking a lot of money for our coffee. We do need some standards that are mandatory to make sure that our customers can be assured, if they buy coffee off the internet.
It's up to this level.
Yeah, and if it's, it used to be every single bean of Kona was certified.
Right. Now, the other thing you mentioned was this system applies only to unroasted green coffee. Now, after you roast it, it's a whole different system of how you judge it now?
Well, you mean for grading?
So if I'm buying a bag of coffee from your extra fan or your private reserve, what I'm getting in the bag?
Sure. That's why we use the certification is our records. Every lot number has a certificate number. It's totally traceable from what farm it came from, when it was picked, when it was processed, when it was dried, when it was ran through the mill, graded, and what actually came out of that. And what did we do with it? We roasted it. We made a private reserve, or it was our full city line, or it was our Jenny Cave from Hawaiian. Totally traceable.
Now there is a word that we often use in Kona, and when I looked into it, it didn't really have a specific definition, but they call it estate grade.
Estate grade.
And what does that mean exactly?
Well, there is no estate grade.
Right. That's what I found out, but everyone says it.
Yeah. And here we go, and people come up with their own ideas, but
it's like Kona roast, which doesn't exist. It's just it means no Kona coffee in there, right?
Yeah. So if you really think about it, back in 1987, there was no estate coffee in Kona. No coffee that was grown on one property owned by one individual or family.
I see.
And kept separate, processed, roasted, and sold as an estate brand.
I see.
That's what estate is, right? And until when we started selling to Japan in 1987, we were the first estate.
I see. And that means it came just from that particular field on this farm,
right?
Yeah. Interesting. And in that case, does grading matter, or are you just taking all the different
Of course
sizes?
it does. It still matters.
I see.
Like I said earlier, there's defects that come from the field. And, you got to get them out. There's defects machinery causes. And they all will alter the flavor of coffee negatively. So we try the best to keep it as clean as possible.
I see. Over the years, I know your system has evolved. You've just gotten better at being able to take out those defects with the addition of optical sorting and those kind of things.
Yeah, because we are now optic sorting or color sorting, in the field. So you have the pickers, you train them as best as you can. But now we have to remove all the beans from the field. So they're told to pick the overrides. When they pick a green coffee bean, we don't want them dropping on the ground. Leave it in the bag. And now I have a color sorter that will take all those out. So our coffee will start out all cherry. And, you always have the, human error, so you end up with some of those defects. in the beginning of the mill, and then after coffee's been fermented and dried, you might have picked up an old bean somewhere along the line, so we can take that out in our dry mill.
Nice.
By color or by, actually it scans the bean and sees the defect.
Wow. So I guess we don't have time to go into much more, but my understanding from what we talked about is grading is important. It defines different qualities of coffee. They do sell at different price points. Sometimes they're used in different ways. I know that Prime is mainly used to make our decaf or something like that.
Right.
And extra fancy, I've seen barista champions try to source the beans and remove the 8 defective ones and that kind of stuff. But it's still voluntary at this moment. It used to be mandatory, now it's voluntary, and you're hoping that in the future it comes back to be a requirement so that the customer knows what they're getting.
One bad cup of coffee can ruin your experience, and you'll
never come back, right?
Back to,
that
so
makes
I've
a lot
tried
of
that
sense.
Kona. It's no good,
Gotcha.
and that's not the case.
So I guess the good news is if you buy coffee from Greenwell Farms, it's certified by grade. They're making sure that it's following the legal requirements for the different levels of coffee quality. I think that's all I can say, right?
Yeah. And you remember when you talked about Prime being 15%, we can do a Prime, because Prime does have no size requirement.
Right.
So when you start mixing beans together, you call it a Prime.
Right.
Or you mentioned it earlier, estate grade.
Right.
So we like to mix our beans together, but we are actually grading it to the standards of extra fancy without bean size.
So anything below a certain size will go into the prime category, and then you'll add those secondary defects to fill out.
Well, we don't. We remove all those defects.
I see. Okay.
That's the whole idea.
Gotcha.
Remove all the defects. That's why we have the color sorters and optic sorting and the gravity table. No bad beans.
No bad beans. That's a good. That should be a t-shirt.
Yeah. Hey, good idea.
No bad beans. Well, guys, I hope that gives you kind of an introduction into a little bit about coffee grading. Definitely, if you want to know more, come visit our farm, and we'll take you around the property and show you exactly what these machines do.
Great.
Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Tom. Have a lovely day. Thank you, guys.